In this episode, we talk to a young rising Korean author about her debut novel, Korean Teachers. It's about 4 Korean language teachers at a prestigious university here. The English translation by Elizabeth Buelher was published by Harriett Press, and it came out in March 2022. Naomi, what did you think of the book?
Yeah, I liked reading it because it took me back to the time when I first came to Korea and attended an intensive language course in Seoul.
For me, I love that it delved into the lives of young women who have to deal with Korea's toxic work culture, patriarchal values, and endemic sexism.
It definitely shows the dark side of the Korean language learning boom that's sweeping the world right now.
Let's get into it and meet Su-jin, who joins us over Zoom from Sydney, Australia.
Welcome, Su-jin, to the Cover to Cover podcast. How are you?
Good, great. Thanks for inviting me. How about you?
We're good. It's really great to have you here.
In your own words, can you tell our listeners what this novel is about?
This book is about 4 Korean language teachers working at a university. They all struggle to survive at work for different reasons. Also, there are foreign students learning Korean language. They also struggle too to adapt to Korean society. So it's about women, workers, and races and everything.
Mm-hmm. And can you bring us back to the moment that you decided to write this novel?
So when I was working as a Korean language teacher for universities in Korea, I didn't realize how toxic the environment was because I was too stressed, trying so hard to survive. But when I came to Australia after quitting the job, I was able to look back and tell it was very exploitative. And I wanted to let people know about it because people really don't know the reality, I thought.
Mm-hmm. And you were there working in Korean universities from 2016 to 2019, right?
Yeah, I think 2015 to 2019, something like that, because I was working for a few different universities.
We've seen Hallyu's meteoric rise all over the world, which includes, of course, massive interest in the Korean language. However, your novel shows the darker side of this trend, highlighting the unfair working conditions for Korean instructors who are essentially short-term contract workers with virtually no job security. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, in 2010, a university lecturer committed suicide. It was a big news. Big news. I don't know if have heard, but when he committed suicide, he left a note saying that he is not a slave. And it was not the first time a part-time lecturer has committed suicide. And university instructors' poor working conditions is actually very much well known in Korean society. So after that, the part-time lecturer law was made that universities must hire instructors who teach more than 15 hours per week as full-time, not casual. What happened after that? Universities have started giving classes under 15 hours to instructors. In the end, the law made to guarantee the fair working conditions of instructors made the reality of instructors even more difficult. This was what happened when I was working at universities. So I had to work for 2 universities, 13 hours and 12 hours each, as casual, of course, and I had to renew my contract every 2 to 3 months and be possibly fired every semester. So, except a few head teachers, less than 10%, all instructors worked in those conditions. That was how it was.
Yeah, it's so disturbing that such an exploitative system persists to this day with so little change. Another issue that arises is migrant workers who enroll in Korean language programs to gain student visas. Can you expand a bit on this phenomenon?
Yeah, I think the problem starts with universities treating students only as like money-making objects. So universities accept like foreign students without any conditions or standards and just provided student visas. It made foreigners who had no desire to actually study easily obtain visas and become illegal workers. I actually witnessed a lot of students disappear after a certain time, and some students work all night and sleep in class just to maintain their visa status. since they are working illegally with student visas, they are exposed to illegal payment and illegal working conditions. That was what happens in pretty much all the universities, I can say.
Actually, reading your book, I had a lot of flashbacks because I came to Korea in 2019 and took an intensive language course for a year at a university in Seoul. So it's exactly identical to the setting in your book. It was 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. So we could either enroll for morning classes or afternoon classes. And I recall there were some rumors saying, oh, we shouldn't pick the afternoon classes because those were mainly attended by mainland Chinese students who were in Korea for employment reasons, similar to the Vietnamese students in the book. I mean, I've never gone in touch with those students, but we kind of heard that they were enrolled for visa reasons as well.
Another thing that I didn't know was that teacher evaluations were tied to whether that teacher got their contract renewed.
After my book was out there, I actually got an email from my former students a few times, and they all said, I really didn't know my assessment about you will affect your job security. Like, I thought it's just about, oh, it's like really pure, oh, my Korean didn't get better from this course because I was bad. But, it affects the teacher. If the student's Korean is not getting better, I will be fired, right? So because the score will be all added up. So they all say, oh, teacher, I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. Like, kind of, I didn't really know, but I said, no, it's okay, So I thought the kind of system, that was what I really wanted to talk about. It just like fools teachers and students at the same time. And just it kind of blocks the real, genuine relationship. Because after the assessment was done, I really stopped having good relationship with the students because I know I will be assessed each time, so I can't be fully genuine and free and just loving them. I always have to have a business smile. Oh, you're good. Yeah, you're great. Okay, let's go. You know what I mean?
I was also really shocked because, we also had to fill out those assessment forms after each semester. I just thought it was feedback for teachers, if they needed to improve their course materials. I didn't know it was tied to, whether they would get their contract extended.
Yes. I think it's quite evil system, to be honest. Yeah.
In my classes, there were students from at least 10 different countries. What kind of conflicts or challenging situations did you have to navigate in such a culturally diverse environment?
Not really a lot, but like kind of a Korean teaching environment, like Korean teaching business, we are greatly influenced by the international situations. As I mentioned at the beginning of the book, Korean Teacher, when there was a friction with China over the third issue, the number of Chinese students decreased noticeably. In my class, one time, Chinese students got really angry with the student who said a Hong Kong actor. And a Chinese student argued, you have to say a Chinese actor, not Hong Kong actor. So like this, we have some political issues, which is a bit of talking outside the class, in class. So, but most cultural differences tend to be gently accommodated and rather lead to lively conversations.
Yeah, your people and diplomatic skills must have improved a lot over the course of your teaching.
Yeah, but always like kind of like university says like just don't speak much, don't speak out your opinion, just like be a carer for them. So we have to treat them as kind of like little kids in daycare center. You know what I mean? If they're absent, we have to call them and we have to just keep, oh, you are good. Like, so we didn't have to do such a big role, I felt.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to, navigating a very intercultural environment, in the book we see that the young female language instructors had their pictures taken by students without their consent and uploaded on Instagram with inappropriate hashtags. What message were you trying to convey through this incident?
Yeah, that's actually what not I, but one of my colleague teacher has experienced, and she bravely took it to the police station, and she heard that line, like, oh, isn't it a good thing to be called a sexy teacher or a hot teacher? And I was like, what? Like, how? This is like 2020, right? So it was kind of one thing which made me to write a book about it, because through this book I really try to talk about the labor issues, labor rights, like faced by highly educated workers. But for female workers, I wanted to show that they are exposed to sexual violence in addition to labor problems. So what we had to worry was about, not only unstable employment and unfair evaluation systems. We worried about being photographed in class and whether the pictures would be floating on the internet in a sexual context.
There's a character named Miju who recounts being groped by a senior male student at her university club. However, she never got an apology, and people made excuses for him. Noticeably, there's no mention of any legal repercussions. What motivated you to include this incident?
So if you ask any women around my age in Korea, if she has ever been sexually assaulted in any form during her school or university time, I'm 100% sure the answer will be yes. We grew up in a society where sexual assault was accepted as an expression of affection or some silly joke. I wanted to show that it is a problem of whole society. Just saying it can happen anywhere, even in university groups.
In our last podcast episode, we interviewed Ha-won Jung. She was an AFP correspondent, and she reported on the Me Too movement, and she wrote a book actually about her reporting. And in her book, she also detailed a lot of these incidents of women who had to keep silent after experiencing these sexual assaults. Usually they happened at hwaeshik, these dinner get-togethers, and men called them flowers and beautiful things, but they were obviously very, very mistreated. And yeah, it speaks to the level of prevalence that may have happened in South Korean society, but women were forced to keep silent about these issues.
Yes. Before I moved to Australia, actually, me and my husband, we lived in Korea, and he was really shocked to see a lot of drunken girls at pubs, and they are kind of like not really dragged by, but maybe let's say they are kindly dragged by their, boyfriends or some just like friends, male friends. And when he saw it, he was like, isn't it a crime? But it's so normal in Korea, right? Even we have a joke. If you like a girl, you just like make the girl really drunk. You just like pour a lot of drinks, and then when she's drunk, that's kind of your night or something. But when you think about it, that's crime. That's a rape, right? When someone's unconscious. So when I was young, when I got drunk and noticed some touch, like what Miju had, but that's kind of a bit, it's like partially my fault because I was drunk, and partially it's his affection, because he liked me, so he just wanted to touch my body, or he wanted to kiss me or something. So that was very much accepted. So when I look back now, how much crime I went through, you know what I mean? That was just one of the things I wanted to say.
Yeah, reading this book, one of the things that really stood out to me were, the undeniable feminist themes, even though it was not explicitly feminist. Whenever there is a book featuring women, especially younger women, as the main characters, I think these themes inevitably come up. And unfortunately, yeah, they are so many commonalities, especially patriarchal norms and objectification of women. And in that vein, we also notice that marital status plays a key role in how these women are perceived in the workplace. For example, Honey lies about being married to her British partner, and she gets asked, "You're married, why do you still work so hard?" Can you talk about the societal atmosphere underlying these characters' experiences?
Yeah, it was also what I heard when I was working in Korea. So I heard like, you are married, why do you still work so hard? And it made me think, okay, women work only for fun when they have husbands, and which means women's work is a kind of joke. It makes sense when you think how we were treated because it was like a joke. We are assessed, every 2 to 3 months and subjected to be fired from it. So at Korean Language Institute in universities, women are more than 90% because of it, right? And when I heard, like, you are married, why do you still work so hard? I know it was translated as, it's guaranteed your husband makes more money than you because like women, makes less money than men. So it's a waste to be serious about work as a woman. So it was very discouraged from hearing it and realizing that it is somewhat true in Korean society. But just, I had no choice. So I worked really hard. It wasn't a joke, but I was treated, as a joke. That's what I felt.
And was this from like a female colleague or a male colleague?
Yeah, female colleague, because I rarely had male colleague, kind of like less than 10%. So, but I can actually say they are kind of less than 5%. So it's a bit rare. So we are all female colleagues, but I think we all pretended we are working just for fun. It's just because it's good to have some names, like, when you're working for universities, maybe, it's good to say that, but we work only for a few hours. How good is that? But when actually the teacher who told me that line, when she was about to be fired, she was very upset and she was trying very hard to keep this work. So I thought, okay, maybe she was pretending as well. It wasn't, because she was married too. But, of course, she was taking it very seriously and she was working really hard. But nobody wanted to admit that I'm working really hard and I am treated like a joke. You know what I mean? So when they treat you shit, you want to treat just back, in a shitty way as well, if it makes sense.
Yeah, it's also painful to sort of admit that truth out loud in a workplace. And I think a lot of people feel the pressure to say something socially acceptable and to just gloss over it as if it doesn't matter to them.
It did matter to all of us, but if we said that out loud, then what would you do? Right? If you say that like, this is not fair, and okay, you go, you leave, we have someone else who will do this same job happily, much more happily than you. So we are kind of all silent working. So that was actually one of the biggest reasons I wrote this book, because I was silent when I was working there, because I didn't even realize that was that toxic and that was so unfair, because I just focused on, surviving from that, because that was my job, that was my, living cost, that was kind of my everything. So I wanted to accept their rules and I wanted to fit myself into it. But now I think we actually should have really looked at the system, like really just, a bit directly, a bit more. Like we shouldn't really avoid facing it. And if we could fight together, maybe we would have made something different. I don't know. It's easy to say because I kind of, if I was still working there, if someone told me you gotta fight back, and I don't want to lose my job, right? But kind of like, it's if it's like kind of harming everybody at the situation, it's only one way you can get out of it. You have to fight together. Otherwise, you will be or just like circling in that situation. because in my book, there are four main characters. They are all victims, but at the same time, they are perpetrators to each other. So if you don't see the system, like you can be a victim and you can be perpetrators without just knowing what you're doing.
Speaking of toxic workplace culture, there's also a lot of psychological violence, pressure to conform, and passive aggressiveness in the workplace, resulting in bullying and even blackmailing among the instructors. One character also later has a psychological breakdown after her contract was not renewed. How much of this was actually based on your personal experience and that of your colleagues?
I remember one day I was having lunch with my colleagues, five teachers of the class. So I don't recall who it was exactly, but a teacher mentioned she had a mental breakdown and is seeing a doctor about it. So from her, we all started to confess that we all went through or are going through some kind of psychological troubles. So I was very shocked that we all suffer badly from the job and started thinking maybe the job is the problem, not me, because I thought it was me having all the kind of mental problems. So like I recall this moment a lot when I was writing the book because I wanted to say like all the teachers who are going through hard time that it's not you, it's the job, it's the system. In this system, everybody will be a victim and perpetrators. So don't feel so bad or guilty. And, it's just like we are all in the same page, I thought.
Now you're in Australia and you've left that teaching job at the university. Do you still keep in touch with your former colleagues and hear from them how things have gone? Has anything changed, you think?
Yes, it changed a lot because after I came to Australia, the COVID, broke out. So, like, of course, like, it's so insecure. I heard more than 50% of teachers were just fired. And a lot of my friends, they were good friends, my colleagues, they had to just, sit for the test to be a public servant and or other things they had to prepare. And even the teachers who survived through the COVID time, they are still preparing something else because they really realized like, it's just like one day you can be fired and you can't really fight back. So yeah, it's really sad whenever I talk to them. It's just, yes, you are really just at the edge of cliff and you can be pushed off next day and there's no right for you to say anything about it.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. Yeah, there have been some really disheartening statistics about how the pandemic has disproportionately affected women, young women especially here in Korea, because a lot of the jobs that were eliminated were service industry jobs. And also, yeah, jobs such as like, teaching and instruction. Yeah, so that's definitely like you're, I think, touching on a very relevant issue right now. And this book in general, right? The deepest irony is that the setting is a school, right, where people from all over the world, young people, come with a certain idealized fantasy or image of Korea, and you're kind of part of this system that is helping some of them sort of access this dream, but the reality is that there's a lot of exploitation and a lot of violence, like psychological violence, that goes on underneath the surface. So I think that this was a really important book to sort of shed light on some of the, the reality of what's going on.
Because of COVID or because of something else or worries, all the kind of jobs are getting really insecure. But I think when something goes insecure, kind of women's job was affected like first because women's job is very like kind of always just insecure and it's like first to be laid out.
Su-jin, can you tell us about any current projects you're working on?
Yes, now I'm writing a book about surrogacy So this is a story about Korean intended parents and Austrian gay intended parents and Thai surrogate mothers. So this book deals with women's body rights and gay couples' rights and also, national hierarchies. So this story will be as complex and multi-layered as Korean teachers, I hope. And but it's not an easy work now, but that's what I'm working on at the moment.
That sounds really exciting, and it's extremely relevant right now where Korea has a record low birth rate and
Yes.
some very interesting anti-LGBT movements going on. Yeah, it's definitely going to be touching on some very relevant topics here.
I also wrote a book called Oleanda, and it was published a few months ago, I think November last year. And it was about like 3 Australian Korean teenage girls struggling to survive in Australia. So it was a kind of another version of Korean teacher. And they are not born in Australia, but grew up in Australia within Korean family. So somehow they are in the Australian education system, but at the same time they are like educated by Korean parents. So the kind of friction I wanted to write. So it will be interesting to read if you are interested in any education system.
Yeah, I mean, the diaspora experience is always very interesting. I am also 1.5 generation Korean Canadian, growing up in Vancouver, and I totally agree that it's a bit of a double life that you lead, being in between Korean culture and Western culture. So I believe you said, though, that work has yet to be translated, right?
Yes, will be soon, hopefully.
Yeah, well, we really look forward to that and all of your other works. Thank you so much for your time today, Su-jin. We really, really enjoyed having you on Cover to Cover.
Thank you for inviting me today. It was a very good conversation.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Please tweet us or leave us a comment with your favorite work of translated Korean fiction.
See you next time. Bye.